Again, thank you all for making the time and coming here. Because we are videotaping this, Noel and I are going to have kind of a very narrow window to go through. But just as a reminder, my name is Gary Hart with HRSD and Noel Slater with Arcadis. So we're going to be making the presentation day and give us some feedback. Engage us in some dialogue afterwards. And then, like I say, hopefully you'll hang around to engage with each other afterwards. Okay, so let's talk about what are some things on our workshop today. So we'll go through, introducing some topics. We'll talk about how you get started, how and when you get started. We'll talk about how we can hopefully get you guys to fine tune your abstracts so it's actually maybe a little bit more attractive to reviewers, program community, whatnot. Noelle is going to then talk about more than just a WaterJam perspective, but she's been involved with WaterJam for a number of years in the program, and she's going to talk about the process and procedures of what she has to do after reviewers like myself get through. We'll talk about some resources, and then we'll wrap up and give you guys hopefully some time for some questions, and we can respond to those questions later. So let's talk for a few minutes for those of you who have been to conferences before or who desire to go for some conferences. What are some of the benefits that you all get from going to those things? Well, some of the benefits that I've received from going to these conferences, hopefully maybe you can relate to some of these. It could be, you want to showcase a project that you've done and then also your involvement in that project. That's one of the things I think that we all enjoy at conferences is getting together and hearing what everyone's doing. And, we kind of learn from that opportunity. And it gives you a sense of being part of that community so that we can start sharing that information. The other thing, it helps you fine tune your public speaking and your presentation skills. So one of the things, it might seem kind of awkward to you, but I think most people in the audience pull for you, right? They're not judging you, and they want you to be successful up there presenting. So one of the things that these type of conferences can do is really kind of help you out. Although, one of the things you can do on your own, though, if you're chosen and you know that you have to give a presentation, maybe consider doing that presentation in front of some coworkers, some friends, and whatnot, so that when you get to that conference, you've got confidence in yourself to do that. How about networking? That's one of the reasons that we're here in person today. I think for me, networking with other owners, with consultants, with vendors, other people in our industry is extremely valuable. And what I find is if I've given a presentation at a particular conference, a lot of times people want to engage me in that conversation. So I feel kind of welcomed and excited about sharing that information. And oftentimes I'll approach other presenters as well to learn more about what they presented. How about technical knowledge and transfer? That's another thing I like to get out of these conferences. Not only when I'm giving my presentation, I hope somebody picks something up from that, but also that's one of the reasons I go is so that I can learn more about how I can maybe do my job better, or maybe there's some exciting opportunities I could bring to HRSD. And in the world nowadays, how about most of you who are professional engineers, people who have maybe operators licenses, water, wastewater, there's opportunities to gain credits at these things. So what a wonderful opportunity. Typically, if you're given a presentation, you're going to be there for at least that one day, and you can pick up quite a few credits that way. And hopefully your employer will give you more than that one day. And then, for me, I enjoy the fun of going to a conference. And when I was given some of my very first presentations, I kind of felt a little bit more like, okay, I accomplished something. So my self-worth went up, especially when folks were coming to me and saying, wow, you did a great job on the presentation. I really learned something from you about that. So hopefully you guys will get to experience that, or you've already experienced that. I see and know many of you have seen you at a lot of these conferences, such as WaterJam. So now let's talk about starting with the end in mind, how and when you get started. So one of the things I'd like for you to think about is, think about the last great movie you went to. And what was it that excited you about that movie? What was your takeaways from that? Might it been for me, a great story. Okay, so maybe it was a book that I had read many, many years ago. I thought the book and the writer was fantastic. Now I hear they're turning that into a movie. And so that gets me excited, makes me want to go see that. What about a talented cast? Oftentimes I'm drawn to a movie because maybe there's a favorite actor or actress I've got in there, and I really want to see them in that role because I'm just anticipating how good they're going to be in that. Or it might be, the past success of the producer, the director. You take somebody like Steven Spielberg or George Lucas, all those. Just think of all the fantastic movies that they've made. And so, their reputation alone and their history of making great movies will really draw me in. And then also, how many of us have really been drawn in by an enticing movie trailer? As an example, typically this time of year, there's some really great movies out there. Anybody seen the trailer for the new Star Wars movie out there? And it gets you a little bit excited about that. And so that's another way that people in the film industry have a way of attracting our interest on those. They put out those trailers to get us excited. The timing is such that it happens, at a good time to lure you into that movie. So how might this kind of relate to writing abstracts and then ultimately submitting your abstract, getting that approved, and then ultimately taking it to the end game, which is giving that presentation? Well, the one thing about movies, as you guys know, you really have to start early. So oftentimes it starts when somebody has a great idea. Somebody says, wow, this would be a great thing to make a movie. And then from there, it's, then they have to start thinking about, well, who are my investors that are going to ride along with me? What type of cast do I want? Who do I see in? They'll start storyboarding things to get it all together. And then, many, many director's cuts happens. The movie trailer will come out. And then all that thing leads up to those producers, that cast, bringing that movie to life. And then we're all excited to go see it, and we pay good money to see it. So again, I think that's very much kind of like what we all think about when we're doing the abstracts. You also have to kind of start really, really early, don't you? And what I want to show you now is some of the conferences that we're going to kind of step through that Virginia Section A, WWA, and BWA have. I want you to notice kind of when the conference occurs on each of these slides, and then how much in advance it is when the final abstracts need to be submitted. So let's look at the Industrial Waste and Pretreatment Conference. So it's about a 6-month period from when the abstracts are submitted until that conference. For the Operations Conference, again, about 6 months. Good Lab Practices, that's the one you said that you go to. So about 7 months, between when that abstract period ends and the conference is held. Water Jam, we're running right now about 8 months for that one. And then when we get into the national conferences, like WEFTEC, we're starting to get on even more, 9 months for WEFTEC, and then AWWA Annual Conference and Expo, we're at 10 months when the abstract is submitted, starting the vetting process till that conference. So, again, you could see that if you're thinking about a conference, I'd really like to submit an abstract to that. Be thinking way, way out there in advance on that. So that gets you that gap between when the abstract is submitted and then when the conference is. But what about maybe some steps that you all ought to think about even before the call for abstracts comes in? And this is about part of that early planning ahead. So this is just an example timeline. So I'm going to show you some items that I think are valuable for you. And again, don't take this as you got to do it on the 90th day or the 60th day. But I think one of the things you need to decide early on is you see a conference coming out there. So is this a good fit for you? Is it a good fit for your organization? And if you want to be a presenter at this, that's something you really need to decide early on. Along with that same topic is if you say, okay, this is a good fit for me, a good fit for my organization. Now, if you're working with a client, I see some of you are consultants in the room. So many times I'm assuming that you probably will give a talk about maybe a client project you've been involved with, right? And so one of the things that I recommend that you do is gain approval from your client. Uh, First of all, that they sanction you to give that topic at a conference. And then secondly, maybe you want to invite them along. So it's important to do this. HRSD, our organization, started a few months back as part of our new social media policy, a vetting process where all of the abstracts, presentations that are going to be given need to be approved by HRSD, and they go to our director of communications for that vetting process. So again, make sure that you give us and other owners plenty of opportunity to agree with the idea this is a good and timely topic. So once you've done that, you want to make sure that your employer is giving you the thumbs up, right? They're going to give you the time off. They're going to give you the financial funding. For some of us here, Water Jam's not a big deal, right? It's local to us, but maybe there are conferences outside the area that it might involve a hotel stay, a little bit of travel. So you want to make sure that you get a commitment from your owner that if you submit an abstract and that abstract gets approved, they're going to be there to support you on that. Also, once it's getting close to abstract submittal time and the call for abstracts, there's going to be a number of different tracks. Sometimes Water Jam probably has 25 tracks or so. Many of those are likely recurring tracks from year to year. There may be one or two new ones to get in. So one of the things that might help you is to kind of research the conference you're interested in. Pull up an old proceedings from a year or two back and then see the different types of tracks. And that will likely help you decide your topic might be a great fit for this track. Once again, you've now gone to the point where you've gotten that owner's approval. So now you're thinking, well, I'd really like the owner to possibly be involved with this. And so then you'll have to decide what level do you want the owner or other people involved. Will they be kind of a writer, assistant writer on the development of your abstract and maybe ultimately at the presentation? Are they likely to be involved in your presentation? So once again, I think it's good to kind of lock those things down as well, because if you want that owner to be involved, likewise, you're going to want to seek out and get their confirmation that if this abstract is approved, that they also are going to be able to spare the time and the cost to be able to go there. I'm recommending also, if you don't do this already, that you get, maybe it's somebody in your office, maybe it's some other folks that are trusted peers of yours, to go through kind of a quality review of your abstract before you submit it. Oftentimes, I'm guilty, I get excited, I put the words in paper, and next thing I know, I've skipped some words, or people are looking at it funny when they review it because it sounds great in my head, but somehow it didn't get on the paper right. So I would recommend that you go through that quality step. And then take that feedback that you get from whoever that peer review is, and then build that in to your final version, and then hit that go button. Most of the abstracts nowadays, for most conferences, state, national, specialty conferences, are done in some sort of online format. So now let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that you all can do, maybe to heighten the opportunities of getting your abstract properly vetted by the review committee, and then maybe as it moves on from the reviewers into the program committee. What are some of the things you might be able to do? So I'm going to give you my perspective as a former reviewer on a number of different conferences. So this is not the end all and the be all. This is just a perspective, but hopefully it'll give you some insight. So let's start with some questions. And so one of the questions that I like to pose to you all is, what will be the project stage at the time of the conference? So you saw from many of those conferences, it could be 10 months, 6 months, 9 months when the abstract's submitted until you're actually given an opportunity to present that. So maybe you've got a project that's in construction right now, and it's going to be wrapping up by the time that conference comes around. Well, that might be a great opportunity for you all, you and your owner, or you and whoever else, to share lessons learned or different perspectives at a different stage. So again, think ahead at where things are going to be at the time of that conference. How might you interest reviewers and program committee folks in your topic, right? It's a big thing. Well, I can tell you as a reviewer, I'm going to review everything that's put before me and evaluate those based on the criteria that's given. However, when it rolls on into the program committee, they may have a different look at it. So one of the things that you may have seen in some other conferences is some maybe catchy titles or some things that you say, man, that sounds like that might be really interesting. So I will caution you, though, kind of like that movie trailer. You want some substance to go along with that cool title, right? So I don't know how it's been for you, but as I've been disappointed for movies when great trailer, I'm all excited, and then the movie falls flat, right? It doesn't have all the substance goes with it. And I've seen the same thing with some of the presentations. The title looks cool, the body looks great, but the delivery falls flat, unfortunately. So another question for you is, how might you write the abstract to connect with not only the reviewers, but also the audience? How do you connect your message? Okay, so once you get past that opening title, now you get into, okay, what's the meat of this presentation and how can I really make that stick? So I don't know, you guys have written some abstract, but for me, I think some of the things are, I try to envision myself as a reviewer sitting in an audience and imagine what it's going to be like to hear that topic. You know, is the abstract maybe overly technical? Are there words in there that I don't understand? Maybe it's too many abbreviations. Maybe it's too many terms that are not what I'll call industry standard terms. So think about that whole process, because in many conferences, and I can't recall, Noel will talk a little bit more about WaterJam, many conferences, that abstract will follow you all the way through. And in many conferences, that will be part of the what is presented at the conference as well. So what do you want the audience to learn when they're sitting there? One of the things that I've seen in some conferences is there's a requirement that the abstract writer put a couple of key takeaways that they want the audience to have. Sometimes you see that, sometimes you don't. But once again, as a reviewer, I'm thinking of myself sitting in an audience and saying, okay, what is one or two really good takeaways that I'm hoping to get from this? So really kind of, once again, think about that, because that'll help me as a reviewer, and I think it'll help our program committee too. So assuming you get your abstract submitted and you've been slated to go and give a presentation, how can you lure people in so that they're there for your topic? So this is a tough one, right? So it's almost like an investment of money and investment of time. So those of us who go to presentations and conferences, our organizations invest a certain amount of money for us to go. So you can almost think of it as a certain dollar per, I don't know, 30-minute slide or $1 per seat. How can you make your presentation the one that's the best investment of their time? So that's again something that you might want to just think about, because it's very competitive, especially when there's, I don't know, WaterJam, 6, 8, 10 tracks, whatever that might be. It's very competitive out there these days. How can I strike the right balance between technical and relatable? Most of you all are very technical people. You know, you've got advanced degrees. You're very proud of the work that you're doing, and that's all great. But think about who's likely to be in that audience. Are they all going to be consultants with the same level of education and understanding that you are? Probably not. Some of them are going to be probably owners. Some of them are going to be vendors. Some of them are going to be possibly contractors, depending on the conference. So I think you probably want to relate to almost everybody, right? That's probably when you're going to get your best opportunity. Is my topic unique or special enough? Again, that's really a call for you to make that determination. I think there's certain hot topics that come up every year. For instance, one of the things I've been hearing a lot, and you've probably been reading a lot of, is PFAS, right? It seems to be, it's in the news everywhere, right? So, might there be, it's a great topic, but might there be 20 abstracts about PFAS? Well, then reviewers and the program committee have to say, okay, what's the best 2, 3 of these PFAS that are going to move forward? So think about, is what you're talking about really unique? Is it something that maybe it's going to be easier to kind of get through? We kind of talked earlier on about maybe getting that right track. So you might say, wow, this is great. Stormwater, right now, I know it's a big passion for yours. Maybe you have a really great, innovative stormwater project that's perfect for that track, and it's unlikely to be something other people are doing. Another thing I try to pay attention to, and I request you all do the same thing, is how many folks in your organization are also putting in abstracts. Hopefully you are having some sort of coordination meeting about this, right? Because it might be different for me as a reviewer than it is for Noel as someone who's on the program committee. Oftentimes what I see in various conferences where I've been on the review group is I am blinded to who the author is, who the company they work for is, and even the client or the owner of that project. However, when it gets out of the reviewer's hands and it goes to the program committee, they're going to look at it very differently. So, I would ask you all to think about how many that you have. Some conferences may have a limit, of how many presentations per owner. So again, I hope you all are having some sort of strategic, tactical meeting on this. I think kind of the last thing I want to talk about is who else are you planning to involve in this? We mentioned earlier in that timeline, if you're going to get your owner involved, you probably want to get their buy-in early on. There may be other people in your organization or maybe outside of your organization that really add great value to that abstract and that presentation. Some of the best ones that I've read as a reviewer, and then they came to be great presentations, is where they had multiple perspectives. There may have been an owner, there may have been a consultant, there may have been a contractor in there. And so, seeing multiple perspectives on not necessarily, everything that went right, but sometimes it's nice to know, well, what are the things that fell short or missteps along the way? Those things that you can share with others. I would caution you, though, that the more people that you add to an abstract, and especially if you're intending to get those folks involved in the presentation, depending upon the length of your presentation, you have to make that presentation handoff pretty smooth, right? Because you might lose a lot of time in all that transition up and down a presenter. So again, that's part of that start with the end in mind. Think about from the very beginning, if you're involving 2, 3 other people in your abstract, and you hope that they're going to ride along with you. Think about from the early steps, how are you going to transition to give each person a meaningful role in that presentation? Noel, let's turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so I'm going to kind of back up a little bit and give you a little bit of some good information from my perspective. So this is my 4th year as on the technical program committee for WaterJam. So a lot of the information I'm going to give you is very WaterJam specific, but I think it's applicable to a number of conferences. And so I think that there's some information that you need to sort of know as you're in that abstract development phase, because it's important to understand what happens when you submit that abstract. Where does it go? And then how do we actually determine which presentations are going to be in our program? So I think backing up to before you even submit it, pay attention to those abstract submittal guidelines. I think everything that Gary said is very, very important, but some of the just technical details, like is there a word limit? The worst thing is when you have this perfect abstract that you have had reviewed by peers, and then you go and it's truncated because it's a 300-word limit, and yours is 315 words. So pay attention to things like that. A lot of times on the website, there will be the rating criteria for the abstract. So that's basically what are the reviewers going to look at and rate you against as they go through all of those abstracts and review them. Again, when are the abstracts due? Very important. Sometimes there's a 5 p.m. deadline. Sometimes there's a midnight deadline. Pay attention to that. You would be surprised, maybe not, if you're procrastinators like I am. We actually have tracked how abstracts come in, and it's very flat, very flat, very flat. And then there's this like spike in the last day, and you see people submitting abstracts like 4 minutes before the deadline, but the website will stop and you won't be allowed to submit your abstract. And that's really kind of, after putting in all that work, you definitely don't want to get caught with something like that. Gary mentioned coordinating with your coworkers at your organization or your company. Most conferences will have a rule where there can be one presentation by company per session, and also one presentation per person for the whole conference. So you might have a couple of projects that you think are really great and you want to submit. Note that if they both rate well through the review process, only one of them is going to be slated. Same thing goes if you have a number of stormwater papers. Let's say, I'm going to say stormwater a lot because that's what I do. I apologize. But if you have a number of stormwater papers at your company, we only have 2 stormwater sessions at WaterJam. So it's important maybe to kind of go back and look and see what last year's program looked like, because that means there's only 2 of you at your company would get selected. So maybe there's ways that you could, perhaps your client could be the lead author on that paper, and they could also be involved in the presentation, and that takes out the repetitive company issue. So knowing who your authors, obviously who's going to be speaking, having their contact information ready, because all of that information will usually be required when you submit the abstract. So having everything right there will really help that process go a lot smoother. And also, if you're selected, what are the requirements? Some conferences will require you to write a paper. It's not just show up with your presentation, right? WaterJam is a little simpler. It's your presentation, a PDF of your final presentation is included in the proceedings. But I do know, I think at WEFTEC, and there are others where you need to actually submit a paper, and that is what goes into the conference proceedings. So it's good to know that up front, because it might help you to kind of structure your abstract. So you submitted an abstract, now what? I'm not going to read all of this, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea. This is tags on to what Gary was talking about a little bit here. Understanding what that abstract scoring guidelines is going to make your abstract better, okay? Not all conferences do it like WaterJam does. WaterJam, we have a list of volunteers. We send out email blasts. We ask folks to come. We don't care if you're not a wastewater expert. You can review wastewater papers. If you're not a stormwater expert, you can review stormwater papers. We ask for folks to just volunteer and review papers, and then we give them, here are the criteria. And for all of these criteria, you rate that paper 1 to 10. Okay, so just to give you some examples, we ask about abstract quality, right? Is the abstract well organized? Is the project goal clearly defined, stated? Is it too heavily skewed? Does it just seem like an advertisement, right? So an abstract that just seems like somebody's trying to sell you something, it's going to get a low score based on that one criteria. The project status is another one of those criteria. Does it look like it's been completed? Is it in the early stages? A lot of times those projects that are kind of have gone along through the process, those are more highly rated just because I think there's more to talk about. You have some conclusions and maybe some lessons learned as well. The originality of work, is this something new, different? Have other people presented on this? The relevance, really, will the abstract topic appeal to the WaterJam audience? Is it a hot topic? You mentioned PFAS. I can't tell you how many PFAS papers we got 2 years ago, I think was the first year of PFAS papers, but every one of them is drinking water treatment for PFAS. So I think last year you saw a lot of PFAS papers, but maybe some different spins on PFAS. So if PFAS is your thing, perhaps there's a different way or something new that somebody else is not presenting on. And then kind of global interest. You know, will this abstract contribute to a well-balanced technical program and increase the overall appeal of WaterJam? Like I said, not all conferences ask for random reviewers to review but a lot of conferences will still use similar type of criteria. You may just have one small committee, depending on the size of the conference, that's going to sit and read every abstract. Okay, so just keep these types of things in mind, particularly if you're going to be submitting for WaterJam this year. So I just want to kind of walk through with the scoring and the process to get our abstracts from the submittal phase to the basically the technical program slating phase, which is where we sit down and we determine, okay, which ones are going to make it into our program. So like I said, for WaterJam, the scores for every one of those criteria, they're tallied up. So you can get a total of 50, I think is the score, every single one of them. We actually do something, we normalize the scores for each session. So that is so that we're comparing the apples to apples, right? So if somebody is just a really harsh scorer and they read all of the wastewater papers, but they didn't touch the water papers or the stormwater papers, those scores for the wastewater session may end up being lower. So we go through and we normalize all of the scores. So that's just, it's Excel math. Once we get all that done, we sit there with a ginormous spreadsheet of all of our abstracts, and that's when the conference program planning starts. And that's when the fun begins. So the actual slating process. We read every single abstract. We're not reading them for content or to review them. That's already been done by the reviewers. We are reading every single abstract to see, is this abstract in the right session? Should we move it? Does it make more sense to be somewhere else? So we kind of do that to start, right? Make sure that every single abstract is read. Between 300 and 400 abstracts, just to give you an idea, right? So it's a lot of work. Once we go through that process, like I said, we move them to the appropriate sessions if we need to. And we actually do that quite a bit. You'd be surprised how many abstracts, because we only give you one choice. And you might pick that one session that you think your abstract fits, but maybe when you got done with it, it really should be in design and construction or, you know, asset management or something like that. Then we have to sit and determine, okay, what sessions are we actually going to have this year? We start out with those, you know, the numbers, I forget, 25-ish sessions that you're allowed to kind of select when you submit your abstract. But sometimes we find that maybe we don't have enough papers in one certain session, and we have to ditch that one. If we don't have enough papers to make that a quality session, we're not going to keep it. Or we have a lot of papers in another session, we end up with 2. Last year we had 2 sustainability and resiliency sessions because that was a hot topic, especially around here, right, in Hampton Roads. It was a very hot topic. We created 2 of them. I think 2 years ago we had so many awesome water papers that we ended up determining that there was a lot of them that were disinfection related. So we had 2 water sessions, and then we had a water session disinfection related. So you might get accepted into a session that you did not submit to, but I just want you all to understand kind of how that process goes, because it might help you to determine where you should submit your abstract. Checking for duplicate speakers is my least favorite part. Because we have had very good papers where one of them gets tossed because we already picked you for another session, we can't put you in this one too. So that's that whole, make sure if you have 2 great papers, if there is a way to submit it, you know, maybe it's a coworker or maybe it's a client that can be your primary submitter, because that's what we look at that. We look at who the primary speaker is, and there's 2 of you in there, one of you gets ditched, and it's usually the lower rated paper of those 2. Once we get down to that point, we slate the top abstracts. I won't get into the boring part of that because we actually do pay attention to score, and we pay attention to, you know, highest to lowest in that session. And then there is a way that we actually slate them time slots based on that, but that's no fun. So what happens next? I put the Carlton dancing guy up here because this is my favorite part. At the end of that day, we go through, and all of the accepted speakers will be asked via email. We'll send out email, hey, your abstract has been submitted. Please confirm your ability to present, right? So we have had some folks come back and they're like, thank you so much, but I can't, or, you know, I'm not going to be able to make it. My employer, maybe they didn't get their employer's permission first, right? They can't come. We slate alternates for every session. So we would notify the alternates there if you were selected as an alternate, hey, we'd like you to be part of our program. Now, alternates can be called up to, we have had alternates fill in for us like a week or two. So if you are selected as an alternate, don't get discouraged. A lot of times alternates get called. We get a lot of cancellations, particularly in the last couple of months, right before things happen and folks can't make it. So if you're selected as an alternate and you accept, say, yes, I'll be an alternate, please prepare your presentation. Be ready to be called. And I mean, worst case scenario is you have that presentation ready for another conference that you might be able to give it to. And then also, presentations are typically collected before the conference. A lot of times if you make last minute changes, you can bring those with you on a flash drive. But you want to make sure that you have, you know, you're not making changes the day before. We typically collect PDFs for WaterJam a couple of weeks beforehand so that we have those ready for proceedings. Make sense? So just wanted to give you kind of a list of resources here. These slides will be available to you guys. If you have any questions, these are all of the folks that were involved with putting this abstract workshop together. Anything we can do to help you, we'd be glad to do so. So with that,
I think we're good.
I think we're done. Did you guys have any questions or?
Yeah. We were in the beginning. We were talking about abstract writing and having it peer reviewed and looked at. Has there ever been, I don't know if there has been before, any thought of having some sort of preliminary review booth or something set up at WaterJam or any other conferences? I don't know exactly how it worked out. It's popped into my head.
So it's an idea. What do you think the value might be to something like that for you, Danny?
I was thinking more for, like, I know we have students to submit to and younger engineers to be able to go through a process with folks like you all who are running.
Yeah.
So there may be some
Volunteers
peer
that may
people
wanna come
there.
sit and, like,
Okay.
be an outside third party kind of
Okay.
initial review that would help set up submitting their abstract for the next year.
For the next year?
Yeah, great concept.
9 or 10 months. Basically,
Yeah.
right after
Yeah.
the conference anyway.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's true.
No, that's a good idea. That's something that we can talk about.
Something to help instigate the abstract,
Yeah.
maybe coming in early, that'll help bring that spike
Yeah.
down a little.
I've always recommended, particularly for younger folks, if you have never given a presentation, or maybe you haven't done a lot of them, if your office will let you do that's how I started. I'm one of those weird people that really likes to get up and talk in front of people now, but I wasn't always like that. So my office would, my company would say, okay, Noelle, come in and give your presentation at lunch, and I would, get feedback from folks and things like that. I think that's invaluable to practice it ahead of time and see what some of your peers will say.
Agree. And the one thing that I think that all of us are a little nervous about getting feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But if something like that were to happen, Danny, I think we'd want to be encouraging to people. We're going to give you feedback with the idea of helping you be better. Please don't take it that we're trashing everything you say.
Right.
Other questions?
I would
Kyle.
say, Jane's idea, if you want to take it further, you can push that kind of stuff to the committees. Doing I know for like web tech
Yeah.
workshops, which I've done lots of, they always have
Yeah.
preliminary review period.
Yeah, and I think some of the conferences, it's the committees that do the reviewing.
Yeah.
I think
that's
ACE
what-
might do that. I'm not positive, but ACE might have the committees review.
Well, in some of the conferences, what we find is the program committee, the abstract reviewers have to go a step further. Noel mentioned in some of the conference, like ASCE, you have to do a paper. Well, you have to submit the paper months and months ahead of time to an assigned reviewer. And Kyle, I think we did something similar on the WEF Collections Conference, and you have to have that paper and your presentation vetted properly, and then enough time to provide feedback to the presenters to make it a little bit more uniform type presentation.
It also might be helpful. I mean, the proceedings from the year before. If you attended JAM, you should have been given a link to that, so you can go through and see some of those papers. I know any of us who have been to conferences, a good one and a bad one, or maybe a presentation that kind of falls flat. So take notes from both. Try to structure yours to be a little bit more on the exciting side, not as technical. Think about your audience.
Can your author and co-author change through the course of submission? Like, for
Yes.
example, if your consultant moves around, and
Absolutely.
can they have someone else fill in for their spot in that presentation?
Yes. So all of that would be, for Water Jam, that's all coordinated through us. We have deadlines for the planners. So we have a registration planner that's put out. That's right before registration opens up. That one is usually pretty preliminary, so there'll be some changes. And then we have the conference planner, and usually the cutoff for that is like August. But we get a lot of changes. That is something that happens, and we can't always fix the multiple consultants, because if somebody cancels and the co-speaker has to come in, things like that happen. But I think during the slating process, that's when we really pay attention to.
And there's one other thing that you can do to kind of help with that. I mentioned that sometimes there's an advantage of having multiple presenters on your paper. Well, like I say, the emergencies come up, situations come up where maybe one of the people on your presentation team can't make it. And if the rest of you all, or if you had another owner and you're the sole, you can kind of bridge that gap. Especially if you've been working together, you could do it as maybe a singular presentation. So that's another reason I like to try to have maybe multiple people in a presentation. Again, just in case somebody drops out.
Yeah, it happens.
So selfishly, the one thing I was hoping to discuss today was just like on the abstract layout, technically getting in the weeds a little bit on that.
No, that's okay.
Is there like I try to do like problem statement solution. I also have seen stuff where people do like, here's what I'm going to cover. I don't know. Do you have? I think that's a good way to go. But is there things that you guys look for?
Myself personally, I like to see it well structured, right? Not,
Right.
I like the way that you said that, laid out. So this is kind of how my presentation would be structured. Here's the problem. Here's what we did. Here were the benefits, or something like that. Something that you can go through and say, yeah, this makes sense. I'm actually going to learn something from this, right? I think that's something. I do a lot of reviews as well, but I might be a little bit.
Well, and I think
skewed
as
because we go
a
into the end.
reviewer, kind of like what you were saying, I think it helps us, if there's uniformity in the format of what an abstract looks like, right? I think you guys have done a great job over the years trying to bring a lot of that uniformity in the way that you structure it. But yeah, anytime you can try to standardize something, it certainly makes it easier.
Right.
Like Noel said, I think one of the Water Jams, there was 400 some papers, had to review them all, and
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And some of the conference Water Jam's a lot more structured than others. Sometimes they allow you to put all sorts of other figures and attachments in there, and it can eat a reviewer up pretty quick.
Yeah, we do. I know Water Jam, there's no figures, no charts, nothing like that. It's just straight, text that's required. So, right. I think some conferences, I believe we do have a slot for kind of key takeaways you know, what are some key things that you're going to get out of this presentation? So even if there's not a spot for that, I think that if you have the words available after you've written the rest of it, I think that that's something that's, as a reviewer, I like to see. I think that.
So Kyle, if you've got some suggestions, like I said, I know you've been on a lot of different kind of conferences for program committees. If there's something that you might want to suggest to Noelle and her committee, for you to be open to some suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was hoping you say no, but you're like, no.
Nope, sorry, no, too bad. No, yeah.
One thing I've seen that I really liked is when they tell you what the presentation is.
Yes.
Like literally, here's what the problem is. Like typically something blah, 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 here's how we address that problem, which is great. But then also that it could be one sentence.
Yeah.
I always thought, I personally have liked that, but I just didn't know what you guys did. And
I
it
do.
says like, I'm going to cover these aspects of this project.
Right.
Maybe it's like, if it's modeling, you're going to
Yeah.
cover hydraulics.
Especially, you know,
It's a clear picture.
I'm not a, you know, a wastewater engineer by any means, you know, but I have gone in, if I go in and start reviewing abstracts, I will, you know, particularly when we're low on reviews, we try to keep that review period open until we get an average of about 7 reviews for every abstract. I think that's a lot, right? So if you go in and you're doing reviews, we ask that you review all of them in the session. That's just one thing we typically ask of our reviewers. But I do, you know, if it's particularly if it's a subject I don't really understand all that much, I like it to lay it out like that so that it's easier for me to follow and, you know, understand what they're really going to be talking about.
Yeah, typically I don't care where they're from or who they work for.
No, and I
I'll try to
actually,
be unbiased.
I almost
Right.
tried, we used to, I think at one point they used to actually go through and scrub names out of the body of the abstracts. I think for the most part, folks have been pretty good about not putting company names in there. There are some companies that they just do. They always have.
Well,
But so I always kind of I like to see it with none. I don't want to, you know,
Yeah.
I know which projects are ours. I tend, you know, I don't review my, you know, my company's.
well, just keep in
abstracts, things
mind,
like
you know,
that.
different organizations, professional societies do it differently. Like I'm involved a lot with DBIE these days,
Mhm.
and they don't do the blinding process. So you do see pretty
Yeah.
much all the details of who the presenter is, the company name, the client, and all that. So I think the way that you guys are doing it for Water Jam is a more fair, consistent process.
That's what we've tried to be. If you've been around here enough, a lot of times you know what those projects are just by reading them. But.
Yeah.
A large utility.
Yeah.
Subdivision,
Yeah.
I
I
have
like
no-
it when they try
I
to
have
mask
I have no
HRSD.
idea who you're talking about.
I was like, yeah. when they try to mask HRSD. I'm like,
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
who you're talking about. Yeah.
They copied our webpage, didn't they? Yeah.
Right.
So if we want to be part of the review process, are you the best person? to
Yes.
contact?
Absolutely. Send me an email. Pradeep here, Sudini, he is our latest victim. I mean,
Volunteer.
volunteer, yes, volunteer for the technical program committee. So, so you can send them to me and I'll forward. We're just keeping a list. And basically, once the abstract period closes, which is January 10th, we have a list of all of the folks in the past who have volunteered. We try to scrub that every year to get rid of the, you know, the bounce back emails of the folks who have left and gone to different places. But we will add your name to the list and then you'll get those emails. So please, you know, review period is open and we'll send you a link. I don't know if you were a reviewer last year. We're back to our old system, so I'm hoping it is a little bit cleaner and easier to use than the one that we used last year. So.
We talked you guys out here. You ready for some cookies?
Good cookies.
and hopefully some networking. All right. Well, again, thank you all for making the opportunity to come to HRSD and listen to Noelle and I